This week, Josh, I am so excited to talk to you because I have had the incredible opportunity from this platform to speak to some of the most brilliant writers and speakers that are working in my field. I have met incredibly talented and successful performers and aerialists and dancers and studio owners and sex workers of all different types with all these very fascinating, interesting jobs. And frankly, I haven't been and Nate, and I got to meet Nate and Laura and a number of incredible people. And frankly, I'm barely qualified to speak to about 90% of them, but you are an amateur film podcaster, and that is just exactly my dream job. So I feel like I am very much in my comfort zone. I am so excited to geek out about some movies and so excited to have you here.
I thought you were about to say, finally, somebody I'm qualified to talk to. A guy that does a podcast that he does not get paid for. So,
yeah, I mean, you know what? I relate to, I resemble that remark a little bit. But no, tonight we're going to be talking about, I guess, the morality, the values, the standards of film. And any conversation about that is going to need to start with acknowledging the Motion Picture Association of America. So can you just very vaguely and briefly walk us through what the fuck that organization actually is and why we should all give a damn?
I don't think you should give a damn except for the fact that they're screwing with our movies a lot. Everything that they do is very arbitrary, but it was made in response to the Hays Code, which was something where everything was censored to a severe degree, to the point where you couldn't even have a silhouette of nudity in your movies, or else that would be something heinous. They wouldn't allow cops to look bad. They wouldn't allow blasphemy. They wouldn't allow basically the most boring film that you could possibly think of would come out of the Hays Code. So then Jack Valenti came up with the MPAA ratings code, which is the ratings code that we see today with the G. I think there was an M in there, and that's been kind of discontinued. Now we have PG, PG-13, R. Used to be X, but because of the porn industry really latched onto it and made it we can do more than X. We can go triple X, and not with Vin Diesel. And they decided to drop that and go into NC-17. And basically, all these ratings are arbitrary to a point. Some of these movies you'll look at it that's a G, that's a PG. But a lot of the R's and definitely the NC-17s are arbitrary to the point where sometimes it seems like the MPAA has a stick up their butt about previous movies in a franchise or certain movies in a genre that got by. I know because the first Friday the 13th snuck by, they started hammering down on a bunch of slasher movies when they became popular, and My Bloody Valentine got cut to shit. So it's just them kind of making up the rules on the spot and giving power to I think 7 or 8 mothers and fathers that are going to instruct their code onto what movies should be.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's legitimately tricky, right? To be evaluating art. I know lots of parents struggle with is my 4-year-old, 7-year-old, 13-year-old, as these different age ranges, what is appropriate and all of this. But who are these people that you're mentioning? Who decided that these specific parents get to have that conversation for, I mean, really for literally billions of people when you consider the influence that Hollywood has on the film industry and art around the world?
Just gonna guess that they're Christians. Just gonna throw that out there.
Well, their identities aren't out there to the public, so we can't really say exactly who they are or what their religion is. But
just a mysterious, shadowy cabal.
But by their values, you can probably guess that they're Christian a little bit. I'd say the values are changing a little bit. They do reevaluate what supposedly matches for an R, what matches for an NC-17, because the movie X that I mentioned came out this year. That wasn't coming out in the 80s. There was no way that movie would come out in the 80s. That'd be a hard N-17 instead of the R that it got this year. But the values change, but because it's so arbitrary, it really matters about who the people are making these decisions. And sometimes they're movies you can point to that the big movie producers are making. They'll get by with something that an indie filmmaker can't get by with.
Sure.
So and if there's a big studio picture that comes by, they'll say cut out 2 seconds of boob shot and you're good. an indie person puts in their movie, like we're not allowed to tell you what you're supposed to do. You just got to figure out how much nipple this movie's allowed to have.
Yeah, no, you hear that from a lot of filmmakers, that there is no real guidelines and no real feedback until you have a certain amount of like power, until they can be bothered to deal with you. There have been countless controversies over the past 10 years or so around movies like Blue Valentine or Blue is the Warmest Color, about like, well, should this be NC-17? And it does seem to be just completely made up.
There are like certain movies where I understand, like maybe Caligula. I have a hard time saying that name for some reason. But that movie is like borders on porn. And I can understand certain movies go NC-17, but to the point where like Friday the 13th Part 7, I watch a lot of slasher movies. They got the NC-17 because Jason whacked a camper into a tree in a sleeping bag 3 times, so they cut it down to 2 or to 1 time, and suddenly that's no longer an NC-17. There's no gore or anything. It's just a sleeping bag against a tree, and suddenly 1 time is easier than 3 times.
Well, so it is really arbitrary, and these people making these decisions kind of unilaterally wield this power. Am I overstating it? Like, how much influence nationally and I guess globally do you suppose these folks really have?
I mean, they're in charge of the movies. They say like the MPAA is self-regulator or self-censoring, and like these are supposed to be guidelines, but no movie theaters or no big movie theater is going to put in an NC-17. So if you put NC-17 on your movie, it's not going to make big money. It might be able to do. Yeah, it might be able to do fine on streaming. We're seeing movies that are skipping that in the streaming age, but up until like maybe 10 years ago, that wasn't even a viable option. Mm-hmm. And still, those streaming movies, they're getting ripped off for the most part. So it's still killing them. It's just killing them a little softer.
Well, recently it was announced that Disney's film Lightyear is going to be banned in 14 different countries just because of a very brief moment of queerness. No doubt that's going to cause a lot of studios to kind of hesitate about pushing forward on queer representation. Do foreign markets have the same influence, or how do those like foreign markets change the way that we choose to make films in Hollywood?
See, this is a hard one because sure. I'd say like in America, throw that out throw this out for everybody to see. I do think representation matters, and like that was the bare minimum of representation of like blink and you'll miss it representation. Yeah. But it was representation. At least it's like a step forward. But the movie studios are about making money, not art, unfortunately.
Sure.
I wish we lived in a world where people cared about art. And I think Disney could stand to take the hit and maybe go on a moral high ground. But I'd be living in a hopeful world if I believe that would be the smart choice that they would go. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely laughable. So like, I understand why they're making the decision to like censor out that stuff. I don't condone it because they have more than enough money, but like, that's how movie studios are going to choose. If like in America, it's going to go out. There's going to be some homophobic assholes that are going to freak out about it. I've already seen them freaking out about it, calling that movie something for groomers and crap like that. But it's disgusting, the kind of things that I'm hearing related to this movie. But at least they're only having to deal with terrible feedback from bigots. They're not even going to reach the bigots in China. Like China will full stop the movie. So like if it's a choice between getting the movie out at least somewhat versus standing by your principles and not having anybody get it, I understand the decision they're making. I just wish that I would like to think that movie studios could hold back on catering to them long enough for China to realize that they got to give into this. Although I don't know if that would happen. I watch a lot of Chinese martial arts movies.
China give in? I don't know, man.
Yeah, one, and this is such a like Lightyear specifically is such a strange example. I will acknowledge I have not seen the film myself, but just the fact that it's largely kind of mediocre, generally speaking. I mean, most folks seem to feel that it's not a great movie, but there's going to be this whole conversation now about its financial take and its financial viability and whether or not queer representation had a factor to play in all of that. And it's really upsetting to think that these arbitrary things are getting in the way of our art on such a complex level.
I mean, I'll be honest, as a queer person, I should be more upset about the whole censorship thing, but I'm more upset that they replaced Tim Allen as the voice of Buzz Lightyear.
That's a complicated factor here too, because he's become something of a problematic figure, at least for some folks. I'm not trying to be the arbiter of cancellation, nor am I particularly up to date on his specific brand of assholery, but
he's not
there's cause for
canceled,
concern, right?
I heard that he was doing cocaine and he was a cocaine addict or something like that.
I mean,
like,
that's been
he's
true
the
since
one
the 70s.
Hollywood star that hasn't been high as shit since 1987. Come on.
That was the beginning of his career. That's what got him the Santa Claus role, because he was good in the snow. But he's not canceled. He's still doing a Santa Claus thing for Disney right now. So they just replaced him because Chris Evans is the bigger star than Tim Allen right now.
Fair, yeah. Well, so setting aside the concept of foreign markets and the complications that are implied there, just talking about the MPAA here in the States, what are some of those common criticisms? We've been talking about how arbitrary it is, but what are the complaints people have?
Well, like the big complaints I'm seeing is like you can have no thrusting in sex in your movies. That's like one of the big weird things of censorship is that for some reason, even if it's under a blanket, if they see some kind of movement, there's going to be that's going to be too far and put it into NC-17. And then there's the fact that it's not across the board regulated, like what a big movie can get away with. Like there might be a big movie that's had thrusting. It might be outside there was a little bit of thrusting in X, so maybe that's a step forward. But a lot of the regulations, you cannot say it happened in this movie, so it's going to happen in this other movie, because it's definitely not a 1-to-1 ratio on when things can work. Again, and then there's just like, if you use the word fuck too many times, or even use the word fuck as an actual fucking, you can't ever say it in like a sexual way. And sometimes fuck has been needed to be in documentaries that younger people needed to see. And the only problem with the movie that they could come up with was the swear word. But there was a message behind it that needed to reach the younger generations.
It's got to be an adjective. It can't be a verb.
Yeah.
You know what I think it is? I think it's that these boring Christian guys don't want depictions of actual good sex in film, because then their partners and wives will be like, wait, that's how it's supposed to be? Ben Shapiro lied to me. What is this?
It's a real vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Then they're going to actually have to perform and actually worry about their partner's satisfaction. We can't have that. This is Gilead. Come on.
I mean, we are seeing things change a little bit. I think it's because the MPAA is understanding that streaming is where it's at right now, and they don't really have as much control. But like, because like you look in how movies have changed since in the last 10 years, what's been able to get released to theaters, there has been a big change from what it was in the 90s and the 80s and stuff. I still think there's too much regulation on it. And like, if they have a vendetta against you, like they had against Sam Raimi for the 2 Evil Dead movies, and they call Army of Darkness, which is clearly almost PG, but a PG-13 movie, they call it R. Like everything's arbitrary on it.
It's PG,
but like,
man.
Yeah, there's like a little bit of red water in there. But like, so the ratings can come back at them if there's like a vendetta against a franchise, like something got through, and they'll come back at it despite you seeing something way more horrible coming into other pictures. They'll allow because they don't have the vendetta, or it's not a genre that they seem to look down upon. Like slasher movies have or they're definitely looked down upon. So even if they're generally reaching the same level of sex as a drama movie, they're not going to be able to get away with it, or they weren't able to get away with it. They're a little bit better now, but they're still under more scrutiny than like a drama film that has sex in it.
Yeah, I mean the framework's a little bit different, but there's also obviously a significant amount of violence to be discussed in a slasher film, which to me is something that we'll continue to get into. But the real crux of all of this is how comfortable we as a society are with depicting somebody being like brutally massacred. But if 2 consenting adults are experiencing pleasure together, that becomes a real problem. I mean, a particular concern that I've seen brought by a number of filmmakers is that depictions of sexuality are really scrutinized if they reflect not just sex, but female pleasure. You know, if there's a guy going like, oh, you want me to show you my O face? And, you know, we can watch Office Space and have this like fairly graphic, even if it's deadpan depiction of sexuality. And that's PG-13. And that's something that we can show on Comedy Central in the middle of the day. But if there are depictions of female pleasure, it tends to escalate things pretty much immediately to R, if not to NC-17. I mean, what kind of message do you think that subtly reinforces for your average like day-to-day viewer?
It's definitely reinforcing the patriarchy about men are the ones that are supposed to be getting the pleasure and women are supposed to just be the conduit for the pleasure. So like, it's definitely a bad message going out there. Like I grew up with people that basically thought that women didn't like sex because of that. It's definitely like teenager me is like, women will put up with it. They'll be fine. I'm gonna stick my fetus in them. I'll have a great time, and then they'll just like go make me dinner afterwards. That's the kind of presentation I was getting as a teenager. I went a little bit red pill when I was younger, but the males, like all the teen comedies are about guys getting sex, and like it almost feels like the women are an afterthought. Like in American Pie, it was about Jim's orgasm and like all the other male characters getting off, and the women they barely gave a crap about their storylines because they're not the importance of sex. And I would say it raised a bad mentality among men. I mean, a lot of people broke out of it. A lot of my generation came from the American Pie generation, but younger me definitely kind of dug into that side. So it took a little bit of other media and other voices to take me out of that mentality.
No, I mean, that whole movie, like the first American Pie film, the plot completely hinges on the shocking twist that Allison Hannigan is like also kind of nerdy and horny. Like the notion that a geeky high school girl could have a operating sexuality is treated like an almost like supernatural feat in that movie. And
it was kind of a punchline.
Yeah, exactly. And it's subtle. And I don't mean to say that we can't tell these stories, but we tell them over and over and over again without recognizing the message that we're reinforcing.
Well, it'd be fine if we saw more of the other side.
Like,
good.
It goes back, like, you guys are making me think of Grease and the song, tell me more, did you get very far? And then the girls' version, tell me more, did he have his own car? And then there's
the really priorities are inherently different.
Yeah, exactly. But and there's a really good BuzzFeed comedy video about like a modern interpretation of guys singing that song, and they're like, "Whoa, dude, no, that's
yeah." I mean, it's
cool.
been pretty well covered to be a rather rapey film. If you dive into any of the subtleties,
super rapey.
Yeah.
It is super rapey, and I would wager, I don't know, but I'm guessing that film has a G rating.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit older, so the policies and things have changed, but that is worth investigating.